Good evening. My name is Paul Jacobson, and I am one of the counselors here at Gilbert High School. And I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. Appreciate this. I also want to thank Jason Holton for posting this up on YouTube so we have a live feed on the internet. I'd like to introduce Dr. Nancy Berns. She's a sociologist at Drake University, specializing in grief. She'll be presenting on understanding grief and loss. Nancy will discuss why grieving is important, how carrying grief and joy together, ways to support others, and tips on getting through the holidays. Join the discussion whether you're grieving or supporting others with loss. I'd like to welcome Dr. Nancy Berns.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for being here, and welcome to those who are able to watch online. I know that we may have people from different places, and that's great that we can share that with you as well. So I know that you're coming here and you're in different places in your life in terms of why you might be interested in learning more about grief and loss. Some of you may be deep in grief, and others may be here because you want to learn how to support others better. So I'll be covering quite a bit of information today, and I don't want you to think you have to try to remember it all, because that can get kind of overwhelming. So what I want you to think about is finding one or two ideas that resonate with you. What helps you, either as you're thinking about carrying your grief, or as you think about what can I do to help other people more. And so don't get overwhelmed with all the details. And I will ask if you have questions throughout, and I'll save some time at the end, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along. You can raise your hand, you can just, get my attention, and I do want to be able to go into areas that you have more questions about. So we'll do that. When we're thinking about grief and loss, I just wanted to start out with getting a shared idea of what is grief, what is loss. And I like to try and keep that pretty simple in terms of our understanding of it. We grieve the ending of things that we wanted to keep longer. And so in talks and in my classes, I talk about both death and non-death loss. We grieve throughout life because we have a lot of losses. So there's just a few examples here of types of death or non-death loss. You might recognize some of those for yourself, what you're going through, or you might recognize what some other people. And you can imagine that when some of these start to pile on top of each other, then that gets even more difficult. So as you look at that list, we're going to add then what has gone on with the pandemic. So with the pandemic, there's this added layer of loss. And a lot of times people ask me if grieving has changed a lot during the pandemic. And I think that it's not so much that grieving has changed, but that we have a lot more layers of loss, and that there are a lot more people grieving a lot of these layers of loss. So everywhere you turn, there are people hurting, and they're exhausted, and people are on edge. And there's a lot of division, there's a lot of political division, there's a lot of disagreement to go on top of that. So it gets really difficult. And if you feel like you're carrying a lot, that's because you're probably carrying a lot, and that the people around you are also carrying a lot. Now this time of year, I know it doesn't look like that yet, right? It's hard to imagine that we're almost in December, but we'll be experiencing more holidays. Thanksgiving last week, heading into more holidays, celebrating. What makes holidays in particular hard, do you think, when people are grieving? And you don't have to share examples for you personally, you can, but you can imagine what would be hard for other people. What do you think?
The loss of traditions that you once cherished with someone else or whatever.
Yeah, the loss of traditions that you cherished. First time after a loss, or particularly difficult.
Just the joy of sharing it with the person.
Missing being able to share things, share events, share traditions, yeah. What else comes to mind? What makes holidays even harder when you're grieving?
Memories of the past.
Memories, right? That there's a lot of memories in the lights and the sounds, again, in the traditions. There's a lot of talk in our culture, right? A time for families to get together. Everything's merry, peace on earth, it's wonderful, but you don't always feel that way, right? So we add all this up with the multiple types of death and non-death loss that we're carrying, with the pandemic, and during holiday, that's a lot that we're carrying. So we're going to talk about what are some ways that we can do that. And so sometimes the road ahead of you can look a little bit like this, and maybe it can see, you know, the mountain. We're not even maybe there yet. Sometimes it can feel that way. And so we're going to start by looking at how do we prepare for the journey that we're on. And so this bag here is going to help us think about this a little bit. And what I have in here is going to represent a little bit about these weight of social expectations. And Paul, I've asked you this before, maybe you'll be willing to as well. Right? And if you could just lift that and share with people how that feels.
It is heavy. It's a lot of weight.
And how far would you be willing to carry that?
Maybe the back of the room.
Okay. And are you willing to put more in there?
I'd rather not.
All right.
It's heavy.
All right. So you can hear it a little bit, right? It's a lot. And so we're going to unpack this, right? So we'll unpack this one rock at a time, right? These are some things that I'm hoping you can work at putting aside for your journey. It's not easy. Sometimes they take a while. But these are assumptions and misunderstandings about grief that we don't need to carry with us. One of them that I pulled out, you need closure. We can put that aside. You don't need closure to heal. And I'll talk about that more later, but sometimes a lot of people will tell us that you need closure. And when those grieving don't feel like they have closure, they sometimes don't even want the closure. What's wrong with me? Right? This is a question that we might be asking ourselves. Might be comparing how we're feeling, what's going on with us, with the way other people are acting, or people might be saying things to us that makes us wonder, what's wrong with me? And that's a heavy weight that we're carrying. Again, not an easy one to set aside, but we want to try and unload that one as well. Shouldn't you be? Shouldn't you be what? What do other people sometimes say to those grieving? Shouldn't you be what?
Moving on.
Shouldn't you be moving on?
Thankful.
Shouldn't you be thankful? Shouldn't you be over it by now? What else do you hear that just weighs people down? Shouldn't you be? Shouldn't you be working again? Shouldn't you be at home? Shouldn't you be happier? Shouldn't you be helping someone else more? And it's just on and on, that these expectations, that it weighs us down. And it's difficult to even know how we're feeling, because what we're feeling is other people's expectations. Am I normal? Right? A little similar to what's wrong with me. In our culture, we often treat grief as a mental illness. Grief is not a mental illness. Grief is a normal reaction that we have to loss. But a lot of times people expect that there's certain ways that we grieve. And we're wondering, am I normal? Am I doing it right? But there is no one right way. And so if we could stop asking ourselves, am I normal? Or asking, what's wrong with me? And be able to try and set those aside, again, that frees up some of our bag for the journey, and then we can put some other things in there. Are you not over that yet? Right? So that was an example we had when people are suggesting that. Also similar to, you need closure. Sometimes we hear that from people weeks after a loss, sometimes months, sometimes years. It's okay that people are still grieving. It's okay that people are still missing loved ones, even years later. But that's a weight that we feel. You are so strong. Why might I suggest we put this aside and not try and feel you always have to be strong? What's heavy about this one? What might people hear if someone says to them, you are so strong?
Might not always feel very strong.
Yeah, you might not feel strong. And what happens if you're not feeling so strong, if you're hurting inside, but someone says to you, oh, you're so strong? What might happen?
Close off.
Yeah, you might close off. You might shut down. You might decide that I guess I have to keep being strong. Being vulnerable, hurting, being sad, those are not weaknesses. These are things that are really important. We're going to talk about that. Now, there's one more rock I have in here, and this is not an exhaustive list of social expectations. I think this can be one of the hardest ones. If only I had. If only I had what? What are some things that people might wonder? If only I had what?
Reconnected.
If only we had reconnected.
Been there more.
If only I had been there more. If only I had spent more time. If I only had said this. If only I hadn't said that. If only I had asked those questions. If only I had let them know I had forgiven them. If only we hadn't had that fight. Right? So many things that we carry with us. This is a really difficult one. It can take some time. But trying to set that aside would be really important. So now we have a much lighter bag. Right? And we're willing to put some things in there. Now, what didn't I ask you to take out of here?
The grief.
The grief, yeah. It's okay to carry your grief. It's okay to carry emotions. And we might want to put some of these memories inside, things that we're thinking about. So we want to be able to have room for that. So as we're thinking about that, and we look at these roadblocks, if we can clear some of this weight and clear some of these roadblocks, it helps us in learning to carry the grief. Now I do have some handouts. Paul, if you could pass some of those out. And the handouts, and for those of you who are watching online, the handouts are really covering mostly what is on the slides. But so that you don't have to worry about trying to remember everything, or if you want to take some notes, you can have that. So I want to talk a little bit about why we grieve. It's important to understand that grieving is important. So we don't want to shut down our own grieving too soon, and we don't want to try and keep other people from grieving, because grieving itself is really important. For one, grieving allows us to express what is wrong. Grieving is our language for telling the world, for telling others, for telling ourselves, this is not right. This is wrong, and we grieve as a way of being able to express that. Grieving releases pain and pressure that builds. When we don't allow opportunities for ourselves or other people to grieve, then the pain inside, sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's sadness, it builds and builds, and it comes out in other ways. And so we want to try and have opportunities to grieve. And that looks different for people. But make sure that we have that. Grieving also helps us identify what matters most. When we grieve, when we have regrets, they're very hard to carry. But they can also give us some perspective. They can also help us to step back and say, yes, this is what is so important. It can help us appreciate what we did have, what we carry on. It can help us to invest in our relationships, decide what goals, decide how we want to live. So grieving helps us to identify what's important. And finally, we grieve because we love. So if you remember, we talked about what is grief. We grieve the ending of things that we wanted to keep. When we love and then we lose, that hurts. So it makes sense that when we love a lot, we grieve and that hurts. But it's worth it. It's worth that love. Right? It's worth having the grief because of that. So those are intertwined, and that's going to be important to understand as we think about that. So now we talked a little bit about strategies, or we talked a little bit about trying to lighten the load of our bag. Then we also want to think about, okay, so what are some strategies then for carrying the grief? So we'll discuss that. So this picture, sometimes we see this in the spring, right? It's a daffodil that has bloomed and then suddenly there's more snow. And what is important for this point is that the daffodil didn't wait till there was not going to be any more snow before it bloomed. It didn't wait until absolutely sure that all the cold was gone. It bloomed, and if it snows, gets down a little, but it's there. You do not need closure to heal. We don't have to close up all the pain in our life in order to have joy again, in order to have love again. In our culture, we are often given this message that you need to wrap up that pain. You need to set it aside as soon as you can so that you can invest again in other people, that you can enjoy life, that you can love others. But that's not the way it works. You don't need closure in order to heal. So to understand that, our next point goes with that. And that's because we can carry joy and grief together. And it's not just joy and grief that we carry together. We carry a lot of complicated emotions. Right? Think about it for yourself. You go to school, when you go to work, when you take care of your family. You show up that morning probably with a lot of different emotions, right? And you can, most days, do what you need to take care of others, to do your job, to be professional, because you're carrying all these complicated emotions. And that's what's so helpful to understand. And whether it's for you understanding that or when you're helping others, including kids. This is one of the things that, I encourage parents to know when helping their children or helping teenagers, is to know that, tell them they can carry joy and grief together. Because what happens if people don't understand that is that they feel like, if I'm sad, I shouldn't feel any joy. And if I do feel joy in something, if I find myself laughing and happy about something, they may feel guilty about that. Or they might judge other people. They wonder, how could other people be going out and still having a good time? Something really sad has happened here. When we know that you can carry joy and grief together, right, it allows us, it opens up those possibilities. Now that looks different for people. For some people, it may be a while before they can feel joy again, before they laugh again. And for others, it might be right away after a loss, after a tragedy. We cope in different ways, and that's okay. And when we know this, it helps. Right? We don't feel so guilty. We aren't putting that weight in here. What's wrong with me? Am I normal? When other people say, shouldn't you be, right, sadder, then we can turn back and say, it's okay that I have multiple emotions. So we can carry joy and grief together. Now, I've talked about this, that everyone grieves differently. And I use a picture of this lighthouse. This is a lighthouse in Michigan near South Haven. And lighthouses, they come in different colors and different shapes, right? Different markings on them, so that when people are at sea, they can recognize where they're at based on the individual lighthouses. And so I thought that helps us in thinking about the individuals that we are. We're not alike. We're in different places in our life. And just like we love differently, we live differently, we have different interests, we're going to grieve differently too. This is really important to understand, not only for yourself, so you're not just comparing yourself with others, but for your friends and your family. Because what happens when we're not giving each other the space and grace to feel these differences is that we start to wonder, why aren't they sad? Why aren't they grieving as much as I am? They very well may be grieving as much as you, but it looks really different. How they feel, how they react. They also might have a different relationship with what's happened. It's also important for us to know that we grieve differently throughout our life. So one loss in our life, we might respond a certain way, and then another loss happens, and we might respond very differently. And sometimes it's tempting to question ourselves. Why is that? Why do I feel differently? Why do I seem sadder when my dog died than when someone else died? You don't need to compare those. It's okay. We don't always know why we're feeling differently, why we're reacting differently. Know that it's okay, that everyone's grieving differently, and that you can grieve differently throughout your life. And your grief, as you miss somebody in your life, changes over time. And that's okay. And we'll talk about this a little bit later too when we discuss how to support others. So here's another picture of Lake Michigan. And I took this picture during a grief retreat. So I was doing a grief retreat on the lake. And at this retreat was a couple whose daughter had drowned in Lake Michigan. She was in her 20s. And so during our retreat, and then we had some breaks and I was able to talk with them, and I asked them, I said, how are you able to be here? Because I knew it would be hard for them. How are you able to be right by the lake where your daughter died? And they had lived near the lake for many years. It was about 30 miles down the road from where our retreat was. And they said, yeah, it was really hard. And it took them a long time to be able to get to the point where they could find any enjoyment in the lake. I met them 5 years after their daughter had drowned. And there was still part of that was difficult for them to be there. But they said, we didn't want to give up the joy that our family had at the lake. And they said, our daughter loved the lake. It was so much a part of her life that if they moved away, if they gave up being there, they also gave up some of those really important memories that they had. So they worked at it. They worked at trying to carry their grief and joy together when they were at the lake. Now, other people may have decided that's too much. I can't stay here, I can't do it. And they might move away, and that's okay too. So I don't share that story because I think you need to stay in a certain place that has a lot of painful memories, that you need to hang on to things or visit places that are really hurtful. But I do want to encourage you to know that if you want to redeem places, if you want to redeem joy that through those experiences and through other people, that you can do that. It takes time. And knowing some of these other strategies, knowing that you're on your own time schedule for that, you don't have to be rushed, you don't have to compare yourself with others, and that you can carry joy and grief along the way, that can help you in knowing that. There was a woman who lost both of her parents within 4 months. And so it devastated her. And I was talking to her several years after this. And for her dad, a special thing that they did together was they would go to coffee shops. Right? And they had one coffee shop in particular that they would always go to, particularly before special occasions. before her wedding, as one example. With her mom, it was going to a particular department store and they would shop together. So they would pick out birthday gifts together, Christmas gifts, and they make an outing. So that was really special for them. So after they died, she knew for her that she wanted to be able to go back to those places. Not because there weren't other stores to shop at, not because there weren't other coffee shops to go to, but because they reminded her of being with them. And when she went back to the coffee shop, she couldn't even go inside the first time. And it took her several visits before she was actually able to be inside and enjoy a cup of coffee there. So it takes time, and again, other people might not want to do that, and that is okay. But she also said that after I was able to get to that point where I could go back to that coffee shop, it was so important to her because it was a place where she could sit and grieve and also feel joy and remember her dad and remember their times together. And that helped her. It gave her other opportunities. And it gave her time away from other distractions where she could sit and she could focus on that. A loved one who died can help you live. It's not just thinking about those memories, but sometimes it's lessons that we learned from them. What were they like? And when we talk about holidays and we think about gifts, these are also gifts that we can unwrap from our loved ones who have died. What did they love to do? How can I learn from that? How does that help guide me in my life? Another woman said that after her husband died, it was really difficult for her to go places because she'd be by herself. And one of the first places she did try and go to was a wedding, which is really hard, right? You go and you're alone. It's not only that the wedding and memories there, but a lot of people are there with someone else. But she said even though it was hard, she knew that her husband would be proud of her and that he would want her to keep living her life. And that was part for her. Go live. Go have fun. Whatever message that she was able to connect back with her husband and understand that. It looks different for people. Sometimes people have conversations. I want you to remarry after I die. But we don't always have those conversations. We don't always have the time. We have unexpected sudden losses. But we can still think about, again, how they lived, what they did, what they were liked, as a way of unwrapping some of those gifts. All right, do you recognize this? What is it? It's a dandelion. Is this a weed or a flower to you? I hear weed. Some say flower. Right? It depends on our perspective, right? A lot of people would see it as a weed. A lot of people will work very hard to get rid of it out of their yards. All right, let's take a closer look at it. This might not convince you it's a weed, but if we zoom in on this, get inside a little bit, we can see this amazing, intricate creation. And we can find some beauty there, even in something that, we still might see it as a weed, but maybe we can appreciate the beauty of it. Even an imperfection of it being half torn apart, if we're able to get close enough to that. The design, the colors, we can appreciate that. So I use that to help us to think about how do we find beauty in imperfect people and imperfect situations. We have a lot of great memories that we carry from people who die, but we also have a lot of hard things. We carry a lot of hard things, right? That's some of these weights that we're trying to unload, but it's hard. So how do we find beauty in imperfect people and imperfect situations. So sometimes we're looking at, it's not just a loss through death. Sometimes we're just in really difficult situations. Can we find beauty in people helping us? Can we find beauty in small things? Again, looking at grieving and carrying regrets as ways of helping us to understand what's important. So we might have to rethink our idea of beauty and be willing to let go of some of the hurt and some of the conflict and try and focus on what is important. One person that I interviewed shared that she had this difficult relationship with her mom. But she had a great relationship with her dad. And one of the reasons that she had a difficult relationship with her mom was because she felt she wasn't always so nice to her dad. And so it was hard for her then to carry that. After they both passed away, she had to work very hard at knowing, how do I carry these memories I have of my mom? They're very hurtful. But she thought about that and she worked at that. And one of the things that she landed on that helped her was she realized how much her dad loved her mom. And she shared an example of that. Again, thinking back into some of our memories and conversations and experiences to try and understand what do we want to carry with us. When her parents were older, her mom would go travel quite a bit, but her dad wanted to stay home. And so Susie would go visit her dad when her mom would go travel, and they would have a great time. Right? She said, we would dance at home, and sometimes we'd be cursing like sailors. And as part of her job, Susie would teach kids how to juggle. And her dad said, "Can you teach me how to juggle?" She said, "Oh yeah, sure." She didn't have any balls there or any scarves that she often used. So she went to her mom's bedroom to look to see if she could find some scarves. And out she came. She didn't find scarves, but she came out with 3 pairs of underwear. 3 pairs of her mom's underwear. So they're juggling her underwear, and they're laughing, and her dad says, "Don't you dare tell your mom that we're juggling her underwear." And they're laughing. And then he gets really serious. And he says to her, "I love your mom." And she says, "Yeah, I know you do." She had those memories along with the hard stuff. And so you carry some of the hard stuff. It can take a while to put some of those aside. But also being able to get some of that beauty, what you can focus on, what you can carry, and realize people are imperfect. Relationships are imperfect. Our situations are imperfect, but we can still find beauty there, and that can help us. It can help us taking steps forward when we're doing that. So these are some of the strategies. But I want to add a few specific when we talk about holidays. Right, and this is a little bit out of the order. If you're taking a look at your handout, you might flip to the back side for this. So we talked earlier about some of the reasons that holidays are so hard. So one of the strategies is to encourage you to take some time by yourself, with family, to try and reimagine the holidays. What are the deeper meanings of the holidays that you celebrate with your family? And they're different. People have different religions, different connections to different holidays, different meanings, different traditions. So you find that out for yourself and for your family. What are some of those deeper meanings? We try and reimagine and we try and reclaim them, because a lot of times the holidays, it's the cliches and some of the commercialism that surround us. But if we can step back and try and connect back to those deeper meanings, what are these holidays about? Are they about getting closer to the family? But you say that's part of what makes it so hard, right? Getting together with family and not everyone's there. Yes, it's hard, and that's why we're going to take some of those other strategies. We're going to carry joy and grief together in doing this. But how maybe can we use these holidays? How can we even use our grieving individually as a family to have deeper family relationships with those who are still there? How do we both grieve and work at developing even deeper bonds? How do we help others? How do we give? How do we live in ways that would honor the lives of those that we're grieving? When we celebrate Christmas, if that's for those who are Christians, and celebrating that sacred time, to not get caught up in just the ribbons, right? Not just get caught up in the cookies, in trying to have that perfect decoration, but understand that the reason for Christmas is the hurt, is the grief, is the pain. But the joy of Christmas is actually for those who are hurting. And when we can sit back and understand and reimagine, what are holidays? What do they mean? Maybe we can connect more to what we're going through in that time. New Year's, you might decide, I want nothing to do with that, and that would be fine when you're hurting, you're grieving. Or maybe reimagine, what is this like? What can we do? Memorial activities. Again, connecting with family, connecting with other people. So you can reimagine it. It doesn't have to look like it always has. So as part of that, I would encourage you to make room for grief. A lot of times people feel during the holidays, they should, if they're grieving, they're just a burden to others. Right? I'm just a downer. You want to make room for grief for yourself and for others. Now that doesn't mean you have to still go do everything, right? Feel free to say no to things, but also feel free to say yes and to make room for other people's grief. So as part of that, it might be different traditions. So on that list, and do you have a handout yet, Paula? There's just a few examples on here, and you can come up with some of your own ideas for remembering. And I connect this to having space and grace for differences. Because not everybody in a family or in a friend group is going to need the same thing. So for some people, like one example on here, some people want to have stockings hung, including the names of those who have died. Now for other people, that might be very painful. For some people, they might want to talk about traditions and stories and memories of loved ones who have died. There may be others in the family who aren't ready for that, and that's too hard. So having conversations about that and understanding what do people need, why do they feel that way, helps in planning, helps in knowing what are we able to do together. But we also don't want to just ignore the hurt and ignore the grief. So if you can find ideas on here, such as giving gifts to others in memory of loved ones, collecting activities, volunteer activities, whether it's collecting donations of coats and gloves, doing something active. It could be in memory of someone, or connecting it to something that that person loved to do, a volunteer activity that they did. Lighting memory candles, having memory ornaments, making cookies, maybe someone's special favorite cookies, or a remembrance dinner, where everyone brings favorite food of the person that you miss. Right? So times that you're making room for the grief and you're remembering people, but also not being afraid to also enjoy. So it's a tricky balance. And I this to focus on love. And this would be part of reimagining those holidays. Focusing on the love. One, love the people you miss. You don't have to hide that just because the culture around us is talking about the shiny lights, right? Everything good and everything peaceful, everything wonderful. It still can fit in there. Find ways for you privately to love the people you miss, maybe through some of these activities. Find ways, if you're comfortable, if it helps you, in groups, in doing things together or in memory of people. Love yourself. Now, there's a lot of different ways to love yourself. And one, as I mentioned earlier, is feel free to say no to things. You don't feel like making the same big dinner? You don't need to. Again, you can reimagine some of those traditions. So for some people, particularly that first set of holidays after a loved one has died, can be extremely difficult. And maybe they want to reimagine traditions completely that year. It doesn't mean they won't maybe return to some of the traditions in other years, but maybe doing something different. And again, trying to talk with family because there are different needs would be really important. Some families have gone off on a trip together over those holidays that are really hard, to spend time together. For others, they still wanted to be there, they still wanted some of those memories. And maybe combining some of the old traditions with new traditions. On the list, I suggested having, talks. If there is a particular tradition or ritual that someone did who has now passed away, who's going to do that? So that it's not so difficult and awkward when it comes time for that, but maybe talk about it, maybe having that as something special, as honoring the person, as handing that off to someone else. Right? Again, reimagining how we do that. So you can do things different. You can say no to things. You can say yes to things. You still want to go do some of those things, remembering that you can carry that joy and grief. And if other people you feel like, they're going to judge or look at or put these rocks in your bag, it's hard. And you keep working at knowing there's not just one right way to grieve. There's not just one right way to do holidays. So love yourself during that. Try and take care of yourself, right? Best you can. It can be hard, right? Just sleeping, eating, drinking water. Doing what you can to love yourself as part of that. And then loving others. Loving those who are around you and feeling their love. So during the holidays, as part of our reimagining, trying to focus on that love. We grieve because we love, but one of the things that we don't want to forget is that we get to keep the love even after someone dies. We get to keep that love. It's not the same. And part of what hurts so much when we're grieving is that we have so much love and we don't know what to do with it when we had been giving so much of that love to an individual. Maybe we were taking care of them. Maybe we were doing so much with them. And so we still have all that love, but what do we do with it? And so that's part of that grief and that pain. And we want to find ways, how do I still love people and honor and memory and loving that person? What do I do with that? And that can take some time to figure out for yourself, but doing some activities, connecting it with your loved ones, talking with your family. And it'll look different in year 1, and it might look different in year 2. And 10 years later, it's okay to still be remembering, to still be missing those loved ones, because that's normal. People mean a lot to us. And so it's just kind of odd in our culture that we expect people after a few months to be okay and not talk about them. It's okay to keep grieving, to keep missing them. So those are a few specific things with the holidays. And I'm going to get into transition just a little bit more to specifically on supporting others. But before I get that, were there any questions so far on some of those strategies or holidays in particular that anybody wanted to ask? And if it comes to you, feel free to ask later too. Okay, for supporting other people, I start with some of the things not to do, and I don't put them up here to make you feel bad, because some of these on the list you might have done in the past. So it's not to lecture you, chastise you. It's really to try and give you freedom, right? To find freedom in how to support others by taking some of this weight off of yourself that you've been adding that you don't need to add. Don't try and fix people. Don't try and take away their pain. Don't try and take away their grief. It's not your job. And it's not what they need. So if you think back to all the different things we've talked about why grieving is important, it's a language, it's a way of expressing, grieving's a way of releasing some of that hurt, some of that pressure. If we try and take away that from people, we're not giving them those opportunities. When you know that it's not your job to fix someone, hopefully that makes it a little bit less paralyzing to go to someone and try and help them, to be there, to support them. Connected with that is don't worry about finding the right words. This is something that's really hard for people, right? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to write in that card, in that email. But there are no right words. Right? We think of what are the right words. We get caught up in that sometimes because we're trying to make things better for them. But when we understand that I can't just make it all better for them, nor is that what my job is, then hopefully that relieves some of that pressure you put on yourself, because you do want to show up and help. Related to this, to don't minimize their grief. And as I say in here, is to avoid saying at least. Take at least out of your vocabulary. Right, go ahead, right? I'll wait. Take at least out of your vocabulary, particularly when it comes to people hurting. What does it do to people when you say at least, and then fill in the blank? So how might people hear that? What are your thoughts?
Minimizes their.
Yeah, it minimizes your pain. No. Doesn't show empathy. What was the last part?
It doesn't show empathy to what they're going through.
Right. You're not showing empathy. You're not taking the time to listen and to hear them out. You're trying to step in and fix it. You're trying to step in and suddenly make it better. Well, at least this didn't happen. Or at least you aren't dealing with this. It shuts people down, it minimizes them, doesn't give them a chance to share their pain. Now, people mean well most of the time when they're saying that. They mean well, right? Because we are hurting for them. Right? We're hurting that they're hurting so much. I don't want to watch them in pain. We're not very good in this culture about sitting with people in pain. We're not very patient with it. It makes us uncomfortable. Not sure what to do, and we would like that just kind of wrap up as fast as it can, right? Let's get back to where everything's okay again. When we understand that we can carry grief and joy together, and so can other people, that helps us to let go of this need to try and wrap up that pain, to try and look on the bright side very quickly, right? We can understand that it's okay if they're grieving, because there's still room there for joy and love, and they're going to get there. But the grieving is so important. We don't want to take that away. It's also a helpful strategy when people are able to get to the point where they feel gratitude, and they are able to look at a bigger perspective. And maybe for themselves to be able to look on the bright side themselves. Now, the difference here is that they're getting there through a process. And it's that process that people need to be able to do. So if we're trying to tell them what to think, if we're trying to shortcut that grieving process, then we're not allowing them all those opportunities for grieving, for expressing, for sharing, for unloading, for telling you how awful they feel. We're not allowing them the opportunities for grieving. And what happens often, and hopefully, is that when you are allowing people to grieve, it does allow some more space then for them to feel some joy, to feel some love. But those are going to go together. It's the process that's important. So you don't need to try and fix them or say the right words. And the final one for what not to do, there's others, of course, right? But these are some of the big ones, is to don't be afraid of tears, yours or theirs. One of the things that I find really interesting in the research I'm currently doing, which is talking with people who have been carrying grief for many, many years, 4 years, 5 years, 15 years, 30 years, that they're missing loved ones who died. And they tell me a lot of stories, particularly early on, about how they would try different strategies to make sure they didn't cry, not because they were necessarily upset by the tears, but they knew it would make other people uncomfortable. And one of the reasons they didn't want to make other people uncomfortable is because if they were sharing stories about their loved one, they so much wanted to hear those stories. And they worried that if they started crying, the person would stop talking, because they would think they're doing something wrong because you're crying. And so they would do a lot of things to try and not cry so they could have those stories, so they could have that company. So it's a gift that we can give to people when we're okay with their tears, or you're okay with your own tears. Tears are a release. It helps us learn to float in grief. It helps us learn to float in hard times. Now, it's also okay if people don't cry. So if someone's not crying, we don't need to try and make them cry, right? We don't need to try and make ourselves cry. Some people, at different times, or it's just how they respond, don't cry a lot. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's one of these rocks, right? We ask ourselves, what's wrong with me? I'm not crying. Or we wonder what's wrong with someone else because they're not crying. Sometimes we worry about children or teenagers. They're not crying much. This happened. It's okay if there aren't tears there too. Questions on these at the moment before I talk about, okay, then what do we do? Right, that's kind of what is the question. Yeah.
I have a question about the don't try to fix or take away their pain. Like my mom, I noticed that she suffered from the good memory of my dad. And then she doesn't want to eat. Then we as kids, we remind her at the bad thing that did to her. That's when she changed her mood. Are we wrong doing that? Because
Yes.
we saw that she suffered from the good memory.
Yes, thank you. So in one example, right, in that you wouldn't be alone in that, right, when we see people who are hurting and suffering, maybe even from good memories, as part of that is remembering those good memories brings the pain. Yeah, as part of that. And of course, you know, I'm a bit on the surface with some of this, right? And one of the things that we want to keep in mind is when we talk about not trying to fix or take away their pain, is we want to give them opportunities for grieving, but we also want to make sure that they're not doing something that's hurting themselves or hurting others, right? So there would be a balance. So we want opportunities for them to grieve. We're not just trying to minimize what they're going through, because it can take a long time, right? And if we think about all those layers of loss that people might go through, the years and years that someone's with a loved one, and they might carry part of that grief the rest of their lives possibly, right? And so we want to be able to help them. How do we carry that? How do we help them? So balancing that with ways that might be helpful, but still giving them those opportunities for grieving and giving them opportunities to express it in healthy ways, in ways that are safer. So sometimes when we're not maybe for ourselves or for others finding ways that we can express our anger, express the pain inside, our sadness, then either inward it can build up, right, and lead to some other mental health concerns. You know, I said before, grief is not a mental illness. Absolutely, it's not. But sometimes it can be connected with mental health concerns that people are going through, right? So that you might have both of those going on. Or sometimes we're lashing out at others or physically harming ourselves. And so we want to try and make that balance, but giving them a chance to grieve, giving them a chance to express that pain. And when we get into what to do, we'll see if some of those ideas maybe help a little bit with that too. Because like I said, so far all I've said is what not to do, which kind of leaves you sitting there wondering, okay then, what do I do? Thank you for asking that. Other questions at the moment? All right, so supporting others, what to do, walk beside them, right? Not trying to push them, not trying to pull them, not trying to take the bag, right? We're trying to help lighten that load, but give them some opportunities. Listen would be the first thing I put there. If you can be a great listener for someone, you are giving them such a gift. If you think about someone who's been a good listener for you in your life, right? And think about what that's done for you. And you can think about how they're a good listener, and people need different things, what makes them a good listener. It's not just how we listen, but it's why we listen. But why do we listen? And we don't want to listen to just try and respond, again, try and fix it, try and argue with them if we're getting into other issues, right? But if we can listen to try and understand, if we listen to be a witness to their pain, incredibly helpful. And I think it's so easy to underestimate the power of listening. But it's really difficult to find a good listener, someone who can take that time and listen. And when we're listening to someone, if they're willing to talk, and not everybody is, and that's okay. Like if you ask somebody, do you want to talk? And they say no, it's okay, because asking's still important, because you're remembering them. And you're giving them opportunity, and maybe later they will want to. So we don't want to, don't take it personally. You might not be the person for them to talk to at that moment. Maybe they need someone else. But asking and being there is important. So when we're listening, what we're trying to do is encourage them to keep talking without shutting them down. So if you think about it, you do this for yourself too. Right? We do this in our conversations, and we do this in our relationships with people. I say something to you, and then I'm kind of watching to see how you react. Is it safe? Can I say more? Right? I might say a little bit more, and I'm going to see how are you reacting. Is it safe for me to say more? Right? So when we're listening, and when we know our motivation is to try and understand, to be there for them, to share, to maybe try and make sense of their own thoughts and feelings, right? That helps to be an open, safe space for another person. When we're trying to fix things, when we're trying to give them opinions, when we go into our own stories and we kind of take over, that's a message to people that, well, I guess now is not a time for me to talk, or it doesn't feel safe. So it's hard. I can't just give you all the right things to say all the time, right? And again, we're trying to get away from being so worried about the right words, but it's trying to be open and there and taking time and being available. And sometimes just being present, right? For sometimes when they're hurting, they want to be with people occasionally, but not necessarily talk. And that's all right too. Do some activities together, do things. You don't always have to be talking, or you don't always have to be talking about loss and grief. And maybe you ask if they want to, and then that opens up the opportunity for them if they want to, but just being together. So that connects here too, inviting people to do things. And they might say no, and that's okay. Again, it's important that you've asked, and asking months later. Or one woman that I talked to after her husband died, she said she had a group of friends who very faithfully kept asking her if they wanted to go do things. And she appreciated that, but she didn't feel ready to go out and do things. So she kept saying no. And about a year later, she finally got to the point where she felt like maybe she could start doing some of those things, but they had stopped asking. Because it's hard, right? It's hard to keep asking. You feel like, hey, they don't want to. Right? It takes some security and confidence on our own end to understand what might be going on. So keep asking if they want to go places. And with holidays especially, try and let them know it's okay you're not outwardly having a good time. It's not, I just want to be with you. Let's just go do things together. Because people worry that I'm going to bring you down. Right? So trying to communicate that. And again, they might say no, but being asked is helpful. When we're talking about discussing with others someone who's died, if you know the name of the person who died, use their name. Sometimes people worry, I don't want to say a name because maybe they're not thinking about the person. They're thinking about the person. And hearing someone's name is a really special part of relationships and love. For parents to hear the name of their children, right? To hear your so-and-so's mom, and they lose that. And hearing the name of their loved ones helps with the social presence. And if you're not sure whether they want to talk about something, you can ask, and they can let you know. What to ask? You could ask questions such as, what were they like? Tell me stories. A lot of people want to share those stories. They might have some funny stories. Not everybody's ready for that, and that's okay too. And so you kind of fill that out with people. They want to talk, and if there's time for that. And some of those other activities, like for holidays, it might give a chance to write out stories, give people information. So another one here, specifically some of the general ones, and I'm going to talk briefly on children before opening up just some more questions. But no other resources. Right? You're not alone in trying to help others, and there might be times and people get into situations where you don't know how to help, and it's too much, too difficult. So trying to expand your social network of people to help. Who can you ask? And when do you need to bring in other people? Or not just even when you need to bring them in, but just trying to build that support for you and for the people you're trying to help. Okay, I just want to say a few things specific for children. And again, I'm going to open up for some questions. When we're talking with children, children grieve and process differently than adults. Not altogether differently, but it does look a little bit different. And so important to, I think, not underestimate how much kids pick up and learn and understand. Kids are really smart and they're really observant, but they're not always going to tell you what they know or what they've heard or what they're wondering inside, and they might feel too afraid to ask. And so asking them if they have questions. So if something tragic has happened, might be in the news, it might be local, it might be in the family or just in the community. You can ask them if they have questions. One of the things that this does for them is to help them understand if they do have questions, it's okay. That you're affirming that it would make sense that you might have questions about this, and that you might be someone they could go talk to. Listen, gonna emphasize that again. So important to listen. How do we listen? I'm gonna bring a couple of these together here. Because listening is connected with all of these. If we can find a rhythm of communication, particularly when we're talking with kids, with youth, do activities with them, right? I think particularly with teenagers, sometimes it can be great if you're driving together, right? You're not necessarily direct eye contact, but you're doing something and there's an opportunity to talk. With younger children, maybe playing games, coloring, doing something, so that it's not they're just maybe feeling awkward and uncomfortable, or why are we just sitting face to face trying to talk. But you're doing something and open up opportunities. And so you might talk about different things and see. They might have something to say. Give them permission to be sad and happy, as I mentioned that before. One of the big things, let them know they can carry the joy and grief together. The other thing, I always want kids, well, everyone to know, but particularly kids, is to know they're not alone. And connected to that they can grieve differently than other people. Because they start judging themselves against other people. They might wonder, why am I not crying? Why do I not seem to feel as sad as what I see others? And they might be carrying a lot of these rocks themselves. Right? We think about younger bodies carrying some of those, that's a lot of weight. So letting them know about the differences. So a lot of these will also depend on what the situation is. If you're helping children who have a death in the family, someone close to them, if there are ways that they can help with maybe planning some activities, whether it's part of a memorial service or part of activities later, give them some agency, a chance to share their own ideas. What can they do? Allowing them to be involved gives them something to do if they want to, some action, and to a place for them to express their own love and their own hurt and their own pain. So those are a few things. I'm happy to take some questions on those as well, or talking about how to support other people in general. So before, just a few maybe concluding remarks, happy to take some questions now, and I will also have time after we're done together as a group to talk one-on-one with people if you want to explore some questions further. But are there any questions on maybe anything we have talked about or something we haven't hit on yet? And if you have a question, someone else might have it too. We have people listening online and they're not able to ask those questions, so maybe you're asking when they're thinking about it.
Can you speak to a little bit about when the family is grieving and there's children in the family and maybe it's not at the time of the death but it's later, and how you should communicate with your children about what's happening so that it doesn't become scary for them?
Yeah, great. And so the question, I don't know how well people can hear online or in here, that if there's a death in the family, and particularly for children there, how to continue communicating so it's not so scary. I summed that up pretty well. Again, talking with them, not assuming that they're not observing what's going on, and answering their questions when they're asking them at an age-appropriate level, right? And so when we're giving them opportunities to ask questions, we're helping them to know that grief and death is normal. This happens, and if you have questions, please ask, and then trying to talk about that. And again, depending on their age, might depend a little bit on what you say. It used to be that people would say all kinds of things like, Grandpa went to sleep or Grandpa took a trip. I mean, instead of telling them that someone has died, and it's gotten better. But sometimes I think we still try and protect kids from what death means. And it's difficult for kids to understand what death means, right? And it takes time, and kids will relearn what they've lost as they get older. So understanding what their age is and answering them at that time doesn't mean that you shouldn't maybe come revisit that later, months later, years later even. And the same is true for adults in terms of relearning loss. So if a child loses a parent, for example, when they're 8, then they're grieving the loss of that parent at age 8 and what that means for them. But they're also grieving their parent as they're understanding what that means when they're a teenager, when they graduate, when they're having kids, right? They're relearning what's that loss like. And we can switch that around. When a parent loses a child, a parent loses a 2-year-old. A parent doesn't just lose a 2-year-old. A parent loses a 5-year-old, and they lose their 10-year-old, and they lose their high school graduate. They lose grandchildren that they dreamed about. They lose someone to help take care of them. So as we get older, we're relearning loss, and that's part of why grief will change over time, but that it makes sense that we would continue to be grieving and to continue to be hurting. It doesn't mean that we're not doing well in other areas in life, that we're not, reinvesting and doing fine, but sometimes grief hits us. So for children, revisiting that at different times, not just immediately, but as they're getting older too, and trying to talk about that. So that can be kind of hard to remember, because the other thing that kids do that I think confuses adults sometimes is they're really quick to switch gears, right? So adults can switch gears too, and we can be sad and grieving, and then again, whether we're at work or whether we're involved in activity, we can be laughing and having fun, and then wow, the tears just come later. So adults do that too. Kids are even quicker, right? So they might be upset and crying, and then they might say, well, can I go play now? Okay, fine, yeah, fine. Right? That's part of their coping. Doesn't mean that everything's figured out for them. Just at that point, they're gonna go play, right? And so finding times and opportunities to revisit that and building in, so some of these traditions, whether it's at holidays, birthdays, anniversaries of deaths, can be times to revisit, to talk, to ask. So if you have some family traditions that are connected to loss and death, it also builds into your family conversations times to ask how they're doing. So then specifically like on the immediacy, and so it's not scary, I think it becomes less scary when people are talking about it to them and that they can ask questions and know that. The scarier parts are when maybe they feel alone and they can't ask, they don't know what's going on and they're not even sure who they can go to talk about that. Does that help? Does that make some sense?
Thank you.
Are there other questions at things that people would, whether it's grieving, carrying grief, or supporting other people that you'd like to hear a little bit more about? To close, and again, I have time afterwards too, that I'm happy to talk with you one-on-one if you have some specific things about what you're going through that you would like to talk about. But I want to encourage you to, if we think back into the seasons, right? In seasons, and eventually we're going to hit winter, that we're seasons in our life as well, and that when we're going through hard seasons, it can seem like it takes a long time. And likely, because we live in Iowa, we will eventually have winter hit us, and it might hit hard, and at least for me, it always feels like it lasts a long time, right? And so when it comes to spring, maybe March or April, or hopefully we don't have to wait till May, when we start to see some grass again, right? I'm always excited about that because it's been a really hard winter, and every year I seem to be a little surprised that the grass is kind of ugly, right after the snow melts. It's just brown and it's matted and it's dug up, and near the sidewalk or roads, the salt's been there and there's rocks and sticks everywhere. It's not in the middle, right, of the summer or the later spring of bright and green that you're kind of imagining and dreaming, right? It's been battered down by a hard winter. So when we see that, we have to go back to trying to reimagine, right, what beauty is. And at that point, right, getting busy and taking care of that grass and nurturing it, raking it, maybe watering it, trying to take care of it. In time, right, it gets nicer and it gets to that more lush beauty that we're used to. Either we leave the dandelions or not, depending on how we're seeing those, right? But it takes some time. And the same is with grieving and healing. It takes time. It doesn't just happen right away, but along the way we can find beauty, and along the way we can find joy, and we can even at times have laughter, and that can build more. And those are important because it gives us a chance to catch our breath, a chance to keep going. So our journey can be long, and whether we're talking about grieving death or we're grieving non-death, whether we're just worn down from things like the pandemic and the politics and just one thing after another, it's long. Try and find some of that beauty there and know that spring does come. You will get through that. Spring comes, and we just work together at nurturing that and helping each other in trying to do that. So I thank you so much for being here. I thank those who are watching online as well, and I hope that you're able to take away something. So thank you so much, and again, I'm here available if you would like to come talk.